Nat in Mexico who wants to talk about a grounding of ethics. How are you, Nat?
Oh, hey, Matt. I'm great. It's awesome being here. I've been trying to get in the show for, I don't know, like sporadically for like years, actually.
Well, today you made it, and you made it when Jenna's on. So what more could you ask for?
Yay!
Well, hi, Jen. Hi, Jen.
Hi.
Hey, guys. I once called Talk Haven, and I talked a little bit about this stuff. I used to be an atheist, not just an atheist. I used to be a Satanist. So, and you know, one of the things that I was most interested in was grounding ethics from an atheistic point of view. And I know there's many subtleties, but I've been getting at it for a bit of a time now, and I'm very confident that there's no way to justify an ethics as an ethics itself from that point of view.
Well, if that's true, then there's, if that's true,
and I just,
so if that's true, Nat, then there's no way to justify ethics from any point of view, because I'm not aware of any objection to secular moral system. Hang on. I'm not aware of any objection to secular morals that is in any way solved by appealing to a deity or a god. So I guess quickly, what kind of Satanist were you, and why were you an atheist? And I guess then we can talk about the grounding of ethics.
Well, yeah, I used to be a Wevvyj-MA Satanist.
Sure.
And I don't remember what was the other question. Sorry, Matt.
Well, I mean, you say you used to be an atheist, which is somebody who doesn't believe, and that means that you must have become convinced and become a believer. And I'm curious what it was that changed your mind.
Well, it was an approach to a different form of theism. I think kind of philosophically. So I think, for example, Yahweh, Jesus, Allah, all of those are forms of the divine, but they are not the divine itself, like the essential aspect of the divine. And I think that the essential part of the divine has to do with being. I read some Paul Tillich's writings, which go into it. So I'm fairly convinced that that's not only existing, but actually kind of unavoidable if you look at it close enough.
Okay.
And because I couldn't get around certain things that are very fundamental to being and being in a society, like ethics, free will, consciousness, all of those things that are very of interest to people, I not only didn't see a solution under atheists, that I found it honest and rational, but actually on the other side, I saw it as contrary.
So it seems like you didn't become a theist because you found evidence for theism. You became a theist because you were convinced that theists offered solutions to things that atheism doesn't offer a solution to.
It's both. Yeah, it's both. I do think that under my understanding of the theism that I uphold, I do have a solution. It's not just that atheism doesn't have it, but theism does. So
all right. So here, just to make this easiest, state a problem with with ethics, with morality, that you think your theism solves, and yet atheism doesn't. Because atheism isn't a position on secular morality at all.
Sure. Yeah, sure. One of those would be why do things that are in benefit of other people when you would benefit more from abstaining to do them, or to do something that's contrary to the benefit of another person?
I'm sorry, I don't understand that.
We can get.
I just want, what is it? Can you just describe a particular ethical problem that you think can only be solved by appealing to theism?
Sure, which is every ethical issue itself is.
Well, then it should be easy. So
why be ethical? Oh, okay. The obligation to be ethical itself.
I don't. So who says there is an obligation in the first place?
Well, if there's not an obligation, it becomes a matter of practical resolution, which is not ethical itself. It's just a matter.
No. You don't get to say that's not. You don't get to say that's not ethical, because now you're just saying that you are uncomfortable or you don't like what things look like under atheism. Well, that's too bad, because that's not a demonstration that it's not true. So when somebody says,
but it's not just that, man.
Well, I don't care if it's not just that. That's what you started with. So I'm addressing that. I can't address the things you haven't presented yet. But if you started with something that's a really bad idea.
But I'm not saying that because it's uncomfortable, it's not true. I'm saying that ethics, as the idea we have, has to do with obligations. Like,
no, it doesn't.
You must do this or that.
No, it doesn't. Where does the obligation come from?
Where does the obligation come from?
Yes. So let's start with something. Let's start with Nat. Stop. Let's start with something easy. Let's start with, you and I both think, I hope, that we should not set each other on fire. That it would be immoral for you to set me on fire, and it would be immoral for me to set you on fire. Do we agree on that?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Now, setting aside why it would be immoral, what obligation is there for me to follow that moral conclusion?
Well, what precisely do you mean by it's immoral? Because I think that we have an issue here on definitions, because...
Well, we just agreed that it was immoral. And so the reason we just agreed that it was immoral. So why it's immoral doesn't matter right now. What I'm talking about is, what obligation do either of us have to act consistent with that moral decision?
So how would you ground an obligation to be ethical?
Yes.
Well, that's a very interesting question that I do have an issue with under theism, and it's a hard one, because I don't think it's a rational obligation. It's not because obligations cannot be rational in that sense. I don't think that they can.
I don't agree with you at all that obligations can't be rational. I'm asking. So you called in to specifically talk about this. What is the grounding of ethics? So what under your view obligates me to not set you on fire?
Well, you are not strictly under an obligation not to do so, unless you say to goodness itself. If you are obligated to be ethical in itself, which you could say you are not obligated to in a rational way. I cannot find a grounding for obligations itself.
So we're in the same boat then.
I think it's.
So what you're saying is, I have no obligation.
In that sense, yes.
And neither do you.
In that sense, yes. If we want to go strictly to rationally, yes. But here there's a major difficulty for atheism, I think.
What's the difficulty?
You are turning it into because you're turning it into not a matter about the values themselves or about ethics itself, but about how do I benefit from this? So
no, that's not. No, Nat. Nat. That is not what I said. That is not the problem. You and I agreed that it would be immoral to set people on fire, and then you agreed with me that we are under no moral duty or obligation to do that. And so what problem is there with atheism that you think you've solved? Because the first problem that you went to, let me finish, because the first problem you went to was that we don't have a grounding, and then you immediately agreed with me that you don't either. So what do we do now?
we don't have a rational grounding, which is not to say there is no grounding.
I think we do.
You could have a non-cognitive grounding for ethics.
Well, I don't think that that's of any use.
Irrational.
I don't think that that's of any use, and I don't agree that we don't have a rational grounding, because I've already done lectures on a rational grounding, which is well-being.
Yeah, now, but whose well-being?
In everybody's. So each individual's well-being, and then there's the well-being of the groups, and there's the ability to compare and contrast those things. And the only requirement is that you and I both care about well-being. As soon as we care about that, which we're not required to, all of a sudden then we can evaluate things, right?
But that's, first of all, that's non-rational. It would be only rational.
No, it's completely rational. It is completely rational. It is completely rational once we agree on a measurement to then use that measurement rationally.
Which is not rational. Yes, of course.
Okay. It is rational. It is absolutely rational. I don't understand that why you keep coming back with bald ass assertions about what is or isn't rational. If you and I agree that we care about well-being, then we can use our rational minds to evaluate the consequences of our action and determine whether or not our action is consistent with well-being or if it is in opposition to well-being.
Well, okay. I'll try to make it more concise, because I don't think I'm.
No, sir. No, sir. No, sir. We were having a discussion about the foundation of morality, and every time you get in a corner, you refuse to acknowledge that a point has been made, and you want to start all over again. You're either going to acknowledge points and have a proper discussion, or I'm going to move on to somebody else.
I'm trying to have a proper discussion, but I don't think that you're letting me finish, so I cannot move on. So I think there's an issue there, because I don't think that I'm being able to properly give my point. So
I think that's a whiny load of shit, but go ahead. I think that is a whiny load of shit. I've sat here and had a calm, peaceful conversation with you, and I've rebutted your points, and now you're going to claim that I just haven't let you talk. So now I'm going to let you talk. Bring it. And you better bring your fucking A game, because if you're going to accuse me of not letting you talk, and then you don't come forward with anything more of substance, I'll not only hang up on you, but I'll block your number.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. So you're saying that if you start from a position, then you can create a rational order. That is, if you already value well-being, you can go from then on, which is true. But the very foundation is not rational. So that in itself is not rational.
Okay, Nat, you're done.
Want well-being.
Nat, you are completely and totally done, because you just agreed that my point was true after saying it wasn't rational.
If X, then it's rational, which is the
yes.
same.
That was my point. That was my point, that you didn't listen to because you were waiting for your turn to talk. I said, if you and I agree that we care about well-being, we can then, now that we have a foundation, make rational decisions about the consequences of actions with respect to that foundation. And your reply to me saying that was that it was irrational. And then you said I wasn't letting you talk. And then when I let you talk, you agree with me that it's true, but say there's no rational reason for the initial if. I agree with you. There's no imperative for the if, but I included the if, which means that everything I said, which you've just acknowledged was true, you ignored in order to assert that I wasn't being rational.
I didn't ignore. I was asserting and just saying that in the same way that if X, then rational, in the same way, if we have obligations, then rationally you can create a set of order, which is the same kind of structure. And then I wanted to go on and say that well-being, which I agree is a good foundation, does not need to be an abstract well-being or a universal well-being, which is where I think you and, for example, Sam Harris go off, because my well-being is something that I am interested. That doesn't mean that everybody is interested in a universal well-being.
I didn't say,
like
so I don't, Nat, I did not say, nor did I imply that everyone would be or should be. What I said was, if we agree, then this. And since you do agree, then you and I can use well-being as a foundation and we can have those discussions. And because of that, there isn't a problem with secular morality that is in any way solved by appealing to theism.
Okay. I don't think this will go anywhere, and maybe it's my problem, and I do apologize, Matt. I don't want it to be a difficult conversation. I understand that there are many walls for that. My not speaking English properly.
I don't think it's that.
A difficult topic to have, so I do apologize for that.
I don't think it's that at all. I think it's Nat. If you and I agree on well-being as a foundation, which we do, then you and I also agree that we can then evaluate things to see whether or not it increases or diminishes well-being, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Similarly, if you and I agreed on what God wanted, you and I could use God's mind as a foundation for ethics, and we could then evaluate whether or not we are consistent with God's mind, correct?
Yes.
Except that you and I don't agree on God's mind. You and I don't agree on whether or not a God exists, and you don't agree with most of the other people on the planet about what God's mind says. And we have no way of investigating and finding out what God's mind wants. All I can ever do is get one more human being to tell me what they think God wants. Until some God tells me what he cares about, right, I have no way of evaluating it, which means that your foundation of theism, which is a morality based on what a God wants, is absolutely useless because you have no way of demonstrating what a God wants or if a God wants anything. And so if that's the case, if we agree on a foundation of well-being and we don't agree on a foundation of God, and the God foundation not only does not solve any problems that you identified here, but actually creates additional problems, isn't it time that we throw God out and accept well-being as a foundation between you and me?
I don't think so, and here's why. Because we say we have both. We can unify our ethical basis on well-being, but that's on the surface. Because when you and I could be speaking of well-being, and you could be speaking of your own well-being, and I can be speaking of my well-being.
No, Nat.
Both formulate our own ethics on top of that.
Nat, that's not the case. As long as we agree on well-being, we can have that discussion. Until you can demonstrate that there's a God and a God wants something specific, you cannot use that as a foundation.
Well, yeah, I cannot convince you of the foundation, of course. Yes, that is true. Yes.
Nat, do you think that atheism is the assertion that there is no God?
Do I think that atheism is the belief that there is no God?
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, there have been some discussion as to why, but yeah, I think that's workable definition, Jen.
Okay, what if I disagree with you on that? I'm an atheist, and I don't think that.
Well, it would, it would be hard for us to move on with how we move in the conversation if we don't.
No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't.
We don't.
How about we discuss our definitions?
Well,
and I can tell you what definition I'm using.
Jenna can describe what she means, and you can understand it. And from that point on, there's no problem with conversation once you guys are using the terms correctly. How can you demonstrate that there is a God and what a God wants? Because until you do that, you have zero foundation to point to that is anything more than here's what I think.
I don't think we can prove that there is no God.
What I think.
What's that?
But here's and I think there's if we don't get to definitions, then it would be hard to have any kind of conversation, right? Mm-hmm. So in the way I understand God, it's not as in a particular being per se, like you could say. You could point to it as a Yahweh or God or Allah or something like that. So it has to do with this what lies beneath being. So that's why I say why I think it's a ground of being.
Okay, so you have a completely esoteric. So you're in the worst possible position, Nat, because you don't even have a God that you can point to. You have an esoteric, fuzzy thing. So, for example, whatever it is that you're calling God, what is its view on abortion?
And how did you determine that?
That was question 2. But first, what does your God think about abortion?
Well, sure. What does my God? But I think you're again applying a framework that doesn't work, because the God that I believe in, it's not a particular being. It's not a particular being that says.
Okay, then this is a complete waste of my time. You have a useless God. You have a useless God proposition. Your God doesn't think, it doesn't do, it doesn't act. It can't be a foundation of morality. There's no way to know what its positions are. It's not even an it. This is a monumental waste of everybody's time.
No, I don't believe it, because I didn't finish the thought. It is.
You finished, Nat. You've more than finished. As soon as you describe your God in such a way that it is ineffectual, that there's no way to demonstrate that it exists, that it does not have any views on morality that you can demonstrate, then you don't get to use it as a foundation for morality or anything.
Because you don't point to God as an externality, but you point towards yourself. I'll give you a quick example.
No, you won't give me a quick example. I'm moving on to other calls. Thanks for the time.
Nice try.
Well, thank you.